to the Advancing Women in Sport podcast. Hi, I'm your host, Michelle Redfern. I'm so thrilled to bring you season 2, and I've called it The Boys Club, stories of people who are smashing the patriarchy in sport. In season 2, I'm lifting my eyes and lifting my focus to the whole system of sport. I know from the work that I do with clients in both the business and sport areas, it's important to fix systems and remove barriers that prevent women from all walks of life, from all ages and stages, in all sports on and off the field. I know it's important to remove barriers for those women to be successful. So my guests on season 2 are diverse. They are people of different genders, they're in different geographies, and of course different parts of the sporting sector. What season 2 guests all have in common is that they are agitating, advocating, and activating for gender equality in sport. I hope you enjoy the episode. The Advancing Women in Sport podcast is created on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also celebrate the massive contribution that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples have made to sport, and I acknowledge their contribution across the world. Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of the Advancing Women in Sport podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have a bloke with me because some of you will recall from the first episode of season 2, or my preamble, that I'm looking for great guys around the world who are trying to level playing field for women and girls in sport. Dr. Ryan Storr is most definitely doing that. And, well, I'm going to ask Ryan to tell us, in his words, what it is he does and what he brings and why. But for me, what is really heartwarming and gratifying today is to have a conversation with someone who is a member of the rainbow community like me, and someone who is so clearly focused on all women being able to participate in sport at all levels. So I'm a bit thrilled to have you here, Ryan. So hey, Let's imagine that we've wandered, because we're both in Melbourne at the moment, and let's imagine we've wandered into some fabulous event and someone walks up to you and says, "Hi, who are you and what do you do?" So what do you say?
Well, where to start? So it's changed over the years. Once upon a time, I was a full-time academic. Now I'm kind of a part-time academic, pracademic, some might say, and I am an advocate for diversity, inclusion in sport, but most people will probably know me and probably see me in a media outlet in the last couple of weeks speaking about trans inclusion and trans women in sport. So I co-founded Proud to Play, which is an LGBT sport charity here in Melbourne. So we're the peak organisation for LGBT sport in Victoria. My kind of usual day job is a researcher. So I look at diverse inclusion in sport, but more specifically around LGBT inclusion in sport, with a specific focus on diversity work, in the sense of I don't do as much research into like specifically around homophobia and stuff like that. I've got colleagues who do that, Eric Dennison, some colleagues in the UK, etc. I'm really interested, I guess, in what can be done to change. So in my PhD, I use a diversity framework around diversity work, and it specifically looks at what needs to happen or what can we do to actually make changes, because we can keep reporting stats about how bad things are, but how do we actually change it, and how do we actually get LGBT people into sport? Because for me, it's really important that it's not just players. I used to be a tennis coach, having my qualification. We need to think about it's not just all right to have a few people playing. We need managers, we need coaches, we need volunteers, we need physios. Like, it needs to be all levels of sport. That's what I'm passionate about, and that's what I spend most of my time doing.
And it's interesting you said pracademic, because as we record this episode, we're in the twilight zone that is known as a federal election campaign, which has had a whole bunch of dog whistling to bigots around transphobia going on. But in this very week, the final interview in season 1 of the podcast was released with Dr. Hannah McDougall, who also calls herself a pracademic. And I want to shout out and kind of demonstrate to people what a difference that makes. A pracademic, and particularly what you said, Ryan, about creating not a body of research to report on the past, but research and evidence-backed solutions to say this is what you need to do. And that's such an important part of how we make change, is giving people the tools and the techniques and the to-do list on what to do, but to feel confident that it's backed up by research and evidence. So thank you, Professor Pracademic, as I'm now going to call you from now on, It's that makes a difference. So let's go way back, and I ask my guests this question in a range of different ways. But essentially, I look at those of us who are in the advocacy space, and I think, there are some stages that all of us have gone through. And the first stage is oblivion. Nothing. We don't know what's going on, and I think all of us at some point in our lives were oblivious to the exclusion that certain members of the community, women, girls, trans women, members of the LGBT community have gone through. But then we become aware. Some of us become outraged, and some of us then move into advocacy. But I suppose for you, what was the awareness point for you, which then tipped into to what you do now? So was there something that made you aware, there's something going on here that I need to pay attention to and do something about? Or was it a bunch of things?
So firstly, apologies. The leaf blower has just come by, so he'll probably be there for about 5 minutes. So I was trying to find a spot. So if it needs to edit that bit out, but I think they come the same time every week. So apologies about that.
What this last 2 years of a global pandemic has taught us is that there are leaf blowers, there are doorbells ringing, there are dogs barking, there are kids, I love it because it's very real. And, we've moved away from very clinical, everything must be precise. So leaf blowers rule. No, they don't, but they're a pain, but I get it.
Look, there was a few things that stood out, but there was one thing in particular, and that's what helped and made me start Proud to Play in particular. So when I was doing my PhD, I was looking at diversity inclusion in sport, community sport, specifically looking at how community sport volunteers engage with diversity. So what does it mean to them on a day-to-day basis? They're often given policies and told to be diverse, but what does that actually mean on a day-to-day basis for them? And when I was doing my data collection for my own PhD, and it was part of a larger ARC project. So it's Australian Research Council funded project. One of the things I noticed was that, so I'll give you an example, AFL, or Community Australian Rules Football, used to have tribunal meetings. So on a Monday night, if there was any racism, discrimination, vilification, fighting and things like that, apparently every Monday night the tribunals were full of incidents and things like that, especially related to vilification and discrimination. And when I was getting a lot of feedback and speaking to people, one thing they said was the homophobia never gets addressed. Like everyone just turns a blind eye to it. No one wants to speak about it. Or the young people, they're too young to be gay, so they don't know about it, blah, blah, blah. I found that for about 6 months, and I'm thinking, why is nobody talking about this when it's clearly evident and everybody's talking about it and you can hear the homophobia and the kids using it, but nothing's getting done compared to other areas. So I did some digging, and there was no real organisation. Nothing was already being done. So I thought, I can't stand by, kind of just see nothing happen. I guess I've always been a bit of a leader, activist, kind of, if I see things that aren't right, I'll say something. And then, as I was finishing my PhD, set up Proud to Play with James, the other co-founder, and the rest is history, really.
Why didn't and why doesn't? Okay, let me wind back a little bit. Why does homophobia rank so low on the we must do something about it scale? So if we think about, gender discrimination, racism and vilification, slurs about disability or what, why, in your opinion, why does it rank so low, therefore doesn't get dealt with? And I'll ask you about what enables people to deal with it next, but why does it rank so low?
So this is what led me to do research in this area as well, which I'm really interested in. I've written papers on. Personal opinion, I think it's because of the legacy of homophobic laws and attitudes, probably from the 80s and 90s, especially around HIV and AIDS towards gay men, in particular in the adverts and the media headlines. In Australia, there was like adverts and stuff, and it wasn't actually illegal. In some states, I think Tasmania was the last one to decriminalise it. And I think that left a long-lasting legacy of discrimination and just ingrained culturally acceptable attitudes to not like LGBT people, especially gay men in particular. And the research that I've done kind of looking into that is that there's a few reasons. One of them, I'll give you an example of some clear things that we found. When I did a large project scope and study for Australian cricket, we asked people from a large survey to rank what part of diversity inclusion they thought cricket did well. women and girls was number one. Obviously, very successful women's team and programs, Indigenous, disability, and last was LGBT. So even a large sample of people identify that LGBT inclusion does not get done. It's the least well done within cricket in particular. And I think most of the people are too, like there was one of the studies I did was called the poor cousin of inclusion. It's a neglected area. And there's a whole reason of why people say. So, for example, not in our strategic plan, no appetite for it, gays don't play sport. Like, there's hundreds of reasons. But one of them, I think, is ingrained and institutionalized homophobia within sport and the sports sector. If we think about most of this administrators and leadership and things like that, men who are more likely to hold attitudes which are either indifferent or probably prejudiced towards LGBT people in particular. And I can tell you from interviewing many senior leaders, there is definitely overt homophobia. And especially, we even see it around women. The Matildas is a clear example, lesbian mafia, grooming, all those type of things. You just think, wow, how on earth can you get away with saying all that type of stuff? There's no evidence for it. The same with the trans women stuff that's going on. There's no evidence for it. So I think a large reason is, unfortunately, they don't, for whatever reason, see LGBT inclusion as contributing to their business goals, and they don't see a market for it, and they actually think it's bad for business. So, for example, one of the predominant things I hear, especially within women's sport, mums don't want to send their daughters down to play cricket or rugby or AFL because they'll turn into a lesbian. Now, I'm not sure if people know how sexuality works and whether straight people or gay people can suddenly become heterosexual. I'm sure many people have tried to do it. I've still never seen a cricket bat by playing with it and touching it that turns you into a lesbian. I feel like it would be worth a lot of money. So the actual reality of it is ridiculous, really, when we actually think about the facts around it.
Well, it's bollocks. It's bollocks, and it big with a capital B. So, as you were speaking, Ryan, I was considering the very, very good book Fair Game by Alex Blackwell, who specifically called out that homophobia and the system level homophobia, and how she was silenced from presenting her full identity in the context of, well, arguably she never made captain of the Australian team because of her sexuality. Now, and I say arguably because I think that could be a long debate, but we certainly know she was given messaging around dial it down. Dial down the fact that you're a gay woman because we don't want mums to be put off sending their girls to play cricket. And, so I think there's this, you're absolutely right. There are a whole lot of long-held attitudes and a lot of, I am in my 50s, so I remember the 70s, but I certainly remember the 80s very well, and those Grim Reaper ads around HIV and the shame. Now, I wasn't out then because magically I thought I was a heterosexual back then, and I became a gay person. So maybe I touched that cricket bat. I don't know, but but this is not my story; it's yours. So but I remember that, and there are so many people who carry shame and guilt from that. And then I think in equivalent terms, and to the point that I'm desperately trying to make, is a lot of people still carry views from those campaigns and that just outright homophobia that are in very, very senior, powerful positions of influence, both at grassroots and community sport, right through to elite. And when we look at the composition of leaders in sport, which my data, your data, there's more data than you can poke a stick at, we know that the person who is most likely to be in charge and make decisions about sport is white, male and cisgendered. So for those who don't understand what cisgendered is, it means they identify with the gender that was assigned to them at birth. So white, male and straight. So that very narrow definition of a human, and I'm not suggesting those people are narrow definitions of humans individually, but that very narrow cross-section of society is making a lot of decisions and may well be holding on to that bigotry, which is left over from legacy campaigns. So that's the why. Why you do what you do. And I want to delve straight into where we are right now. So, and we were talking before we started to record about the work in diversity, equity, and inclusion does feel like 2 steps forward, 10 steps back. Many times it can be soul destroying and heartbreaking, as well as joyful and fulfilling. And right now there's there would be those that would like it to believe that this is a national conversation, but there's a conversation going on about women in sport. And there is a group that are trying to protect women in sport. Now, I'm going protect with the air quotes here, listeners, because I'm not subscribing to this point of view. But there are folks who are saying that biological women, so those of us who are born and assigned the gender of female at birth, are the only women that should be allowed to play women's sport. Now, I've got a couple of things that I want to ask you to talk about here. Number one, we know that the participation levels of the LGBT community in sport are very low compared to non-LGBT people. We also know that the participation of trans people in sport is even lower. The question I've got for you, or your insights that I'd like to glean from you, is how might we address the participation levels? Because we know sport's so good for everyone. How might we address those participation levels? And that's, and I'm kind of want to get you back in your wheelhouse of proud to play at an individual level. So how do we help people who identify as LGBT to participate more in sport? But how do we help those who hold the power in the system to allow that? And I'm using the word allow really deliberately because they actually have to allow it. How do we allow that to happen?
But it's a difficult question because it's very complex. One of the key things I think to stress around sport in particular is this notion of a lot of sports administrators and people in clubs, etc., will say, we welcome everybody, our doors are always open, we don't discriminate. The problem with that is that there's an understanding of thinking that everybody is cisgender and heterosexual. So it doesn't work for us. So you might have the best intention that everyone's welcome, but it's not going to work. People aren't going to come.
So when we say everybody, right, what we're saying is everybody but, everybody except these people. Now, I'm not saying people say that more. There actually are some people who will overtly say it. So we've got a picture, we've got an avatar in our mind of who everybody is, and they're cisgendered and predominantly straight.
And it's just there's a blissful ignorance that people coming through the doors can be LGBT, and especially around young people. So 80% of sport participation is under 18, right? Large percentage. And we often hear, we don't have any gay people, we don't know. You don't know. Like, in terms of when young people actually affirm their sexuality in particular, can be anywhere from about 13, 14, 15, 16, that kind of adolescent phase, right? So regardless if they're out, if they're in an environment where homophobia is common, etc., they might internalize that homophobia. They'll spend the best part of 5 or 6 years thinking that homophobia is normal and that being gay is bad. And that's why even people like myself, we grow up with shame around being gay because these sporting environments absolutely amplify that. And then we end up spending years in the therapist's office trying to unpack it, and all these years of living and being brought up in a very heteronormative society around expectations about how men and women in particular should behave. And sometimes you're thinking, well, that doesn't really, it's not for me, or I don't see myself like that. And then it's hard to process, especially if you're a young person. So I think the most work and the most damage that sport does is towards young people. And I actually did a project with LGBT young people. I'm not going to lie, it was horrendous. They were telling me stories about being pinned down in the changing rooms in sport, being bullied by teachers. Teachers have caused a lot of angst over the years. And it forces LGBT people to disengage and not want to do sport. I remember, like, there's certain things that stand out to me over the years. Went up to Sydney University. They did a Pride round a couple of years ago. One of their players came out. He was a good part of the club. He had a partner who used to come down. They really embraced it. And I went down, did a bit of a speech. I handed the trophy and stuff because I think it was a specific match. And I was speaking to a gay guy beforehand, and I was just on the side of the oval, said, "Oh, are you playing today?" And he looked at me and laughed. I said, "Oh my God, no, I'm gay. I can't do sport." And it's that mentality and culture that gays don't do sport, or he could never see himself playing the team sport because we're told we're not welcome. And until those attitudes start to change, we've got a long road ahead.
And so flipping that into, because I'm hesitant here because I don't want to sound like a crass capitalist, but I always think it's follow the money, right? So we want sport to be sustainable, and we want sporting clubs and associations to flourish. And it's interesting when you said you talked about volunteers beforehand, because we know that sport is built on the backbone of volunteerism. We've got literally millions of people volunteering in sport every week here in Australia alone. So I think we want more people to turn up. We want more people to show up in sport. And what we want as sporting organisations is to, frankly, grab a share of their wallet or a share of their eyeballs, which then leads to helping other people grab shares of our wallets. Why would we not understand that there's a commercial imperative for sport to be inclusive of more humans, irrespective of how they identify it? Now, I know that's such a naive question, but I'm being deliberately obtuse because we are talking about long-held beliefs here about, particularly around trans women. They don't belong in sport. They do. We must, for the good of our country and our people, because look at our health outcomes when we have higher participation in sport. We've got to get them into sport for a better society. But we also have to think about it from a commercial lens. So I wonder why that hasn't been considered, Ryan. Is it purely bigotry and long-held beliefs, or am I missing something?
No, it's a very good point again. All these questions are, I keep saying that. So I speak about this all the time. I use theoretical frameworks around diversity management and looking at the business benefits of LGBT inclusion specifically. 10 to 15% of the population, high disposable income generally, higher educational backgrounds, not to say everything, but generally across the board. So to answer the question simply, poor business management skills and leadership, in the sense of why would you not want to engage and take money from 10 to 15% of the population who would then be posting on social media, would be spending money behind the bar, would be buying merchandise? Like it's obviously we don't need to go through all that. So if you can't see that, then that is bad business sense. And the amount of conversations I've had when I've explained that, and you can see the look in their eyes. They're like, "Oh God, I never thought about that." Because interestingly enough as well, out of all the demographic groups, apart from women and girls, LGBTI is the largest, more than Indigenous, more than disability and things like that, and certain cultural groups. So considering it's the largest pocket of diversity, you'd think it would be low-hanging fruit to do it. Unfortunately, though, I think the reason is because they see engaging in LGBT inclusion and with LGBT communities as detrimental to their core business and their fan base, which is the straight white male. And I've had many conversations with this, especially in cricket and AFL, where they think if we do pride rounds or we start trying to get the gays along, then our main core fan base will be disenfranchised and won't go. So we're at a loss. Now,
sorry to interrupt, but that is really disrespectful to the main fan base, because you're assuming that they're a bunch of knuckle-dragging Neanderthals who haven't got a clue. And I find that really disrespectful. So, again, I agree. It's bad business management, not even understanding your fan base.
It's only a few. And there has been studies where they've actually wanted to look into what actually fans' attitudes and perspectives were and things like that. And most of the time they come back in favour of inclusion and support and things like that. So I think it's assumptions around it. And unfortunately, as we're seeing with the trans women debate, you could have 100 fans. I sound like Lady Gaga. You could have 100 fans and 2 of them cause a racket and email and say, you did that Pride game, I'm going to rip my membership up, which often membership officers get. And that's enough to scare them and drive policy and practices around whatever they engage with, whereas they could have 98 people who actually really like what they're doing, but they don't hear about it. And they listen to the 2 people. Happened with swimming in Australia, swimming in America with the Leah Thomas stuff. Resistance and pushback. So they changed their policy to exclude her based on resistance and backlash from a very small minority in the American swim sector and society, not based on evidence. It's literally policies driven by fear and ignorance. And I think we get that around here with LGBT inclusion, because the corporate sector, there's a lot of benefits, and we're seeing it around when organizations engage with LGBT inclusion. Good things happen. I've done lit reviews, I've read all sorts. Never have I seen anything reported that says when an organization or business actively engages in LGBT inclusion, that they're worse off from it and their organization and the bottom line decreased. There's no evidence for it.
It's fascinating, and it's a great segue into talking about leadership under duress, because you've talked about swimming, US swimming, and how when that leadership came under duress or under pressure from a minority group. Now, it's interesting. I wonder how powerful that minority group was. Clearly, actually, very influential. But so for you, what does leadership under duress look like and feel like? But also, how do you advise your stakeholders and clients and what have you about dealing with backlash? Because we know that, humans are hardwired, biologically hardwired to resist change because it's dangerous, yada, yada, yada. You're better at that than I am. But how do you deal with it? And then how do you advise others to deal with the inevitable, whether it's a gentle pushback, I need more information, help me, Ryan, or out of my face, dude, I'm not signing up for your gay agenda. How do we deal with leadership? How do we deal as leaders when we've got that kind of duress thrown at us?
It's definitely a skill. And I'd probably say that's probably why I've been successful in recent years, because kind of worked out how to do it. I can approach one organization or person. It could go down really well, could go down a lead balloon, another, and it's working and being emotionally sensitive to the climate and what might get them over the line. Some people might say, look, I just need a business case. Give me a business case. Tell me why I should be doing this. Others are a bit more kind of understanding. I think in general, interestingly enough, all the people who I've worked with around doing this work and bringing about change has always been with women sport leaders, which reflects the evidence that we know of that women generally have more supportive attitudes towards LGBT inclusion in particular and diversity broadly. There's been a few male allies who've got it and have helped and done some great work. Craig Tiley in particular, whenever we ask him to do events, support, do stuff at the Glam Slam, always supportive of it, and understands the reasons why. Others are more challenging. I think one thing that stands out for me from I've interviewed hundreds of administrators over the years for various projects. There is a general lack of knowledge and insight into what it's like to be an LGBT person. Normally, because the idea of contact theory, they've never met a LGBT person. They might have worked with somebody, but yeah, they might have worked with someone, but they might not have known about it, for example, because a lot of LGBT people are actually out in the workplace. And there's just this complete being oblivious to the issues around. Yep. And even sometimes obviously I do this day to day, but I do often have to check myself in terms of I may be giving presentations or giving an example somewhere, and someone will come up to me and be like, you know what, when you said that, I had no idea, never would have thought about it. and it's very common. So I kind of always now try and really elaborate on the things. And that's why for anybody who hasn't yet watched it, one thing I would definitely suggest, because I think it's wonderful, is there's a new Netflix show called Heartstopper, which it's fantastic. But the main thing about it does a good job, is it follows LGBT young people and some queer stories, but two young men in particular, two young boys, about how they navigate and fall in love. But it just does an excellent job in giving an insight into what it's like for a young gay man who has to navigate the rugby team, being bullied, his mum asking him when he's going to get a girlfriend. There's all these things that I think a lot of heterosexual people don't understand. And that's why it's really important to have shows like that, podcasts, so you can actually hear stories and get an insight into what it's like. Because if you don't know an LGBT person, I can imagine it's quite, you wouldn't know. But I think in order for us to progress as a society, and especially within the sports sector, we have to share the stories and we have to let people know. Because a lot of people and close friends of mine think, oh, it's 2022. Surely it's all good. And you kind of like, well, yeah, but there's that general understanding. So that's why it's important and key to keep doing research around this, in terms of actually these are the issues that are affecting LGBT people. And I say LGBT people as well because it's really difficult. We've got gay men are different. There's so many diversity. You got women, lesbian women, trans people, non-binary. It's a very large group to throw into one category.
And I find, so there's a couple of points I want to pull out of what you've just said, which are bang on. And the first call, well, might be the second call to action, but the first call to action is do not underrate empathy as a business leadership skill in sport and in business. That empathy, it is the stuff that sets good leaders, great leaders apart from good leaders, and of course not so good leaders. Being able to walk a mile in another person's shoes, which is why I have a virtual diversity walk called Walk a Mile. It's for free, and I'll put it in the show notes. But have a walk in someone else's shoes, even for a day, and try and understand. So the storytelling, and I agree, the storytelling, the shows, the conversations, the blogs combined with that research is really important. Ryan, I have the same experience as you. I think I'm going to give a presentation where everyone's going to go, yeah, well, duh, Michelle, we get that. But then I have people go, oh my God, Michelle, I had no idea that there was a XYZ issue. And I go, really? I think, okay, Michelle, echo chamber, you're like you, immersed in this all day, every day. So first of all, empathy, explore that, folks, as if you haven't, oh God, don't do the empathy training that was, for our federal legislators were expected to do. Figure out how empathy can make the game change for your organisation, particularly for your leaders. So that's number one. But what's the second thing, practical thing that leaders listening, anyone listening in sport can say, what could I do to move from oblivion to awareness to action? So oblivion to awareness, how can I get more information?
One of the main things that I always say to organisations, one of the programs we've got at Patriarchy Play at the minute is Rainbow Roadmap, which is helping organisations become rainbow ready. So it basically takes an organisation from doing absolutely nothing to doing LGBT inclusion. And one of the things that you need is data. And that's where kind of the research comes in, because I'm like, how on earth can you build a strategy and try and develop your business and improve your organisational outputs when you don't have any data? You need to understand, for example, we're doing work with Anytime Fitness at the minute. They did a survey recently to their members because we want to get an understanding about how many actually LGBT customers do they have, what are their experiences, how are we going to retain them? And I think most organizations and businesses just do not think like that. So I think data and actually having evidence and understanding the nature of the problem, like if you know that you've got a prevalence of LGBT people within your sport or organization or following, are they happy customers? Like, one thing that stood out to me recently, I want to try and do a project on this. The amount of time people are willing to go to a certain sporting venue or event that they know is inclusive. So we have people go to Proud to Play events who'll spend up to 2 hours traveling just to play sport or be physically active in a safe space. And it's becoming very common. And so I guess trying to appeal to a larger market. But if you're thinking there's a gym at the end of your street and you're that gym and somebody would not want to come in and would prefer to travel 2 hours to go to a different gym, you're not doing business right. Like, what on earth are you playing at? And again, they're oblivious to it. They don't know. So it's getting that data to understand you've got a problem with this, or you have a distinct lack of representation within your sports. And the data shows as well around gay men in particular, in sport in particular, completely absent.
Yeah. Oh, well, in the game that I kind of pin as my number one, Australian rules football, we still have at an elite level, we have no openly gay male player.
Just interested, what's your personal thought about why that is? Because I get asked this in media interviews all the time.
Well, you described it when you were talking about the young blokes in Heartbreaker. I'm going to get ribbed. I'm going to get hazed. I'm going to get bullied. I may end up being physically assaulted, and that's just what's going on in my own head. So you know what? Why would I put myself in an environment where I'm in danger, emotionally or physically? So why don't I just cut to the chase and just not go there? Or if I find myself there, and as I've been playing this sport since I was a young person, and I've gone through my affirming my identity in my teens, or some of us a bit later, and figured out, oh, right, so now I'm identifying as a gay man. I'm in this hyper masculine, and when I say hyper masculine, I mean a very narrow definition of masculinity that we typically associate with men's sport in Australia and beyond. But my lived experience is only really in Australian sport. In football, there's a hyper masculine environment based on a couple of very narrow stereotypes about what it means to be a man. Suddenly, shoot, I'm going to lose my mates. I may lose the respect of my coach. And, coaches sometimes are held in higher regard by young blokes than their parents. In fact, I would hazard that at a certain stage of their life, definitely held in a higher regard. I don't want to lose respect of these people that are such a big part of my life. So I'm going to hide this part of my identity because it's too risky. So that's my view. And I bring, Ryan, and I bring that from my own lived experience as coming out as a gay woman in a workplace. Initially not of my own choice, but working through being identified as a heterosexual woman, then not becoming, I always was, but then people knowing that I was a gay woman, and that fear of exposure, that fear, that being just unbelievably vulnerable. And
that's exactly what it is. And the research shows that. So basically, these young gay men are not playing sport in the first place. So how are you going to have elite players if they're not even playing at the grassroots? So this idea that, there's got to be one in every team, not there, because there might literally be no gay men in that team because they're not playing in the first place. And I think people just don't get that. And I think we really need to drill that forward. So we need to change the environment. There's an important scene around that in Heartstopper where one of the gay men is outside the changing room and hears all this. It's like, why as a gay man would you want to go into that changing room and be in that environment when it's going to make you feel terrible? So
and then if I put that from a gendered perspective into for women, as a gay woman, as a lesbian, here are things that have gone through my mind. Oh my God. So we're doing shared rooms when we go away on the team trip. What if they think I'm going to try it on with someone? And of course I wouldn't. I've got a partner. So that's okay. So that's a bit of an issue. What if I'm going to get called, leso, or, you're dirty, whatever. And, let's face it, I have, just as recently as last week, I had a young man shout at me that I was. But anyway, so, and this is just ongoing, right? What if I'm a trans woman who would just, again, look at that change room and go, oh, this is just too hard. What if I walk in and someone says, get out, you don't belong here? What's the shame I feel and the humiliation that I might feel? So this empathy piece is so important to think, what might it be like for someone who's grappling with where do I fit in and how do I fit in to a heteronormative system? So a hyper heterosexual environment. And for administrators, it is saying, well, what might we do? I know with women, simple things like change rooms. Can we please, we have cubicles for showers rather than the open showers that blokes have. Funnily enough, in my own history as an administrator, I remember a footy coach of men saying, if the women are going to get cubicles, we'd like them too, because I bloody hate showering in front of other blokes. I hate having to hang my tackle out, How about we have doors on toilets? And I still don't know how men can wee in public, but anyway, I just, there's just this. There are a whole bunch of things when you have empathy for other humans. But I guess to bring that back to what leaders can do, and around that good business practices, what don't you know about the community that you're trying to lead and help sustain and flourish in sport? What don't you know? Go and find out. And when people go to find out, start with, don't go and ask the people you think might be gay because that are gay. Go and do your own research. Ryan, where do they go? Because I really want people who are interested to know where to go to start their awareness, building awareness, and then become advocates. So where do they go? How do they, obviously proud to play, but what should they be looking out for?
Yeah, so we've got a range of things. So, for example, if you go onto the Proud to Play website, we've got resources. We've got like an inclusion checklist where you can literally look to get an idea to see whether actually do you have inclusive practices at the minute. We have our Rainbow Roadmap program, and we've got a club one as well. So if you're a club who wants to start doing this work, there's that. Smaller steps before that is, again, watching some shows, listening to podcasts. If you go on my LinkedIn, I've shared all my articles, podcasts, all that type of stuff, where you can get an insight into what it's like and the things, and even reading media and things like that. Like at the minute, I'm not going to lie, it's not great to be an LGBT person. There's just, you're constantly reading stuff about our lives, our relationships and stuff, and it's just like, just leave us alone for 1 minute. And that's me in a very privileged position as a white, gay, cisgender man, for other people in our community. But again, I think one people don't recognise is we are a community. I've got lots of trans friends and colleagues. So when they're being attacked and stuff, yes, it will impact them, but it also impacts me because they're part of my community and they're also friends and colleagues. So we need to think that just because they're maybe targeting trans women, it's a broader issue around our community, because at the end of the day, we are a community. And that's one thing that kind of is good about being an LGBT person, is that we do have a very broad and supportive community. We saw it from the community response to HIV and AIDS, marriage equality. We're now rallying behind our trans community members. I think that's one of the great things about being gay.
Mm. Yeah, I would agree. And, that rainbow community, as I call it, my community, our community is, yes, we are very good at rallying behind, but we need more advocates and we need more straight allies to start looking at the system that systematically excludes us. So I think that the first assumption, don't assume that we're included, because we're actually not. We're not overtly included, coming right back to where we started. Oh, yes, everyone's welcome here. Everyone in a very narrow definition of everyone. So think about everyone more broadly. Brings me to the call to action. So another call to action. So we're going to get you people to jump into Proud to Play, look at the inclusion checklist, Rainbow Roadmap, get the facts, assemble your facts, data and evidence to say this is what we need to do. let's bring it down to, I guess, an individual level, and particularly for those who are saying, I really want to know more and do more at an organisational or a system level for women, all women, and in this case, lesbian women and trans women. What are the specifics around that we know around lesbian women and trans women that administrators should also pay attention to, Ryan?
Well, I think there's an understanding or a misunderstanding and a general assumption that there's a lot of lesbians in sport, right? There might be a few, but this idea that they're swamped and everyone is a lesbian, right? There's not enough lesbians in the world, statistically. If it's about 4% of the population, sport participation is about 60%. So realistically, when you crunch the numbers, there's actually not that many lesbians who play sport because there aren't enough lesbians in the world. So this idea that, sport is inclusive and welcoming to women and lesbians in particular, there's loads of gays who play AFL, for example. It might be our understanding of that, but that's not the reality, like actually if you count them. So I think people need to understand and remember that lesbians do play sport. Many of them do have positive experiences, but many do not. And Moana Hope has spoken out about it. Megan Shute, Alex Blackwell, all these lesbians in these positions. Football lesbian mafia. It's not hunky-dory. It's not nice. So there's a lot of work to do to ensure that lesbian women, coaches, volunteers, managers are included and have safe employment opportunities. Because that's the other thing. It's not just this idea of luxury. Every person in a workplace, if you're a manager, a coach, etc., should have a respectful and equitable work environment. And current evidence suggests that's not the case, especially for many women athletes, and especially the Matildas, who copped a barrage of abuse around that. And football is an interesting one for me, without going too much of a tangent, but I just want to kind of put this in there because it is Lesbian Week of Visibility and it was Lesbian Day Visibility yesterday. So I have a soft spot for lesbians because when I was at university, I went to Loughborough University, which is a very, very big sport university in the UK, and very macho, masculine environment. Wasn't out in particular until kind of probably my third year. And I was befriended by a group of lesbians because the women's football academy was there. So one of my best friends, Sophie, used to play football. And then she introduced me to some of her friends, and I used to go out gay clubbing with them. And there'd literally be me, the solo gay boy, with an army of lesbians going to pride parades, football tournaments up and down the country. I'd watch England women play and I'd be like, I was out with her on Saturday night. And they helped me navigate. They looked out for me. They protected me. They literally kind of raised me as a gay man. And I'll always be forever grateful for that, because in all the sport environments, it was lesbian women in particular that helped me find my place in sport. So when I see stuff written about them and I see things, first gay athlete like Josh Cavallo type stuff, excellent, he's come out, by the way. What about all the women? What about all the lesbian women athletes? No. And you get that a lot, and it's kind of like men athlete. And I just think, unfortunately, lesbians in particular have the sexism and the homophobia on top of all the other stuff. So I think it's a neglected area, and that there's an assumption that everything's hunky-dory when it's not.
And thank you, because I feel very seen. So, there are a lot of assumptions. You're right, and there are a lot of there's a lot of bigotry towards lesbians. But yet we are dealing with multiple layers. So the intersectionality, those multiple layers, intersecting layers of discrimination. So the patriarchy is very, very sneaky, and it is also very clever. And so I have to front up as a woman and a lesbian woman, and now as an older woman. So, some days it feels like we're wading through concrete to try and be seen and heard and taken seriously. But the piece I want to pick up on there is that safe workplace. Sport is a workplace, whether you're a volunteer or paid. And again, coming back to good business management practices, which I'm so pleased that you've brought up. This is another good business management practice. You wouldn't leave ropes lying around for people to trip over to create a tripping hazard. You wouldn't leave water on the courts of a netball court and allow athletes to play on it. You would not create unsafe physical environments, or you would fix it, manage it, mitigate it. Psychological safety and the safety of all women and men and others, but particularly in this instance, the psychological safety of women who identify in many, many different ways must be as important as physical safety. So I think that's a great call to action. What about our trans sisters, Ryan? What do we, as you said, it's right as we're recording this, it's just awful. And the trauma that community of people must be experiencing and reliving over and over again is awful. And I'm sorry to all of you. As leaders who want to change systems and help all people, but particularly trans women, what could we do? What could we pay attention to? Or what could we do? What's a one tool in our toolkit we could do to be more inclusive and celebrate trans women in our sporting environments?
I think the main thing for me that I see is you need to call it out. So if people are saying on Twitter, or they're saying on a Facebook forum, or they're saying it publicly, and they're being clearly transphobic by, for example, saying that trans people are predators and they're trying to get into bathrooms and all the other stuff Catherine DeVisa said, that is not free speech. That is not protecting women's sport. That is overt discrimination. And it's not rocket science to work that out and think, God, that's not very nice. And that's not, it's not free speech. So when you hear stuff and you hear trans people being talked about in disparaging and through vilification, you have to call it out. You can't let it go in terms of, it's free speech. It doesn't work like that. You have to call it out, and you say transphobia is not acceptable. You can't say that, because otherwise, if you don't say anything, it produces and increases a culture of disrespect towards trans women. So that is the main thing to start with. We need to get rid of this language, and we need to show that it's not acceptable to open fire against trans people. Like Emily Seaborn on the project last night talking about trans women. Do you really need to use your platform right now, when you're not competing against any trans women, to speak out and call trans women biological males and all that type of stuff? Like, it's not needed. Like, what if there was trans women in every final, in every competition and things like that? I can understand why you might raise these issues, but there isn't any. It is absolute madness. And unfortunately, I think sport has got caught in the crossfire and is being used as a platform.
Oh, undoubtedly. It's been weaponised by people who couldn't have given a shit about it 3 months ago, honestly.
But they've got caught up in it, and they're not. I'll be honest, I'm very, very disappointed with the sports sector and how any of the sports have came out and said anything. They've all got these inclusion policies that I've worked with them on it, and they've been absolutely silent. And I am very disappointed, and I'll remember this going forwards, because, again, they have this happy talk about we welcome everyone, blah, blah, blah. When it comes to it and they're being attacked, radio silence. Doesn't work like that.
I have often said, and will continue to say, that sport has an extraordinarily important role in the social justice sector. People will listen to sports organisations and high-profile people more than they'll listen to our legislators. It is a vehicle for social change. And agreed, I during the marriage equality debacle, I was so pleased that the AFL, and I don't really care how they got there, but the AFL came out and said, we support, because I thought, that's my sport, right? I'm an administrator, I'm a board director, I participate in this sport, and now my sport has said, you're okay. So I agree. I think that's really important. You've talked about calling it out. It's not bad. I've got through the whole thing without a cough. Sorry, Sienna, you can cut that bit out. So you've talked about call it out, which for me is you've got to step up and be an upstander, not a bystander, to bigotry and abuse and vilification. Are there any good resources, particularly around being a great ally or upstander for our trans community, Ryan?
Not yet. We're going to work on them, which is needed. However, one thing I will say, and that we use these in our educational videos, is Our Watch has some really good resources. So if you type in Our Watch, Doing Nothing Does More Harm campaign, and there's a series of videos which can be used and you can watch them, and it basically shows examples and real life scenarios, whether it's in a bar, at a gym, at a sports venue, which there are ones, around if someone says a misogynistic comment or transphobic comment, how do you respond? And it's exactly the same way. You say something, you can walk away, or you might say, that's not really, we can't really say that nowadays, but by saying nothing, it does more harm. And I think is exactly the same.
That is a terrific resource. Yeah, I agree. It's an absolutely terrific resource, and I'm really pleased. It's such a great organisation. Okay, so you and I know that we can talk for hours, and we can't because people will be losing the will to live listening to this. But anyway, so let's flip. What are you hopeful for? What's the one thing that you're hopeful for in sport, whether it's the next 12 months or beyond? What's giving you hope and you're hopeful for?
The main thing I'm hopeful for, I think, is funding. LGBT inclusion in sport is chronically underfunded. Compared to other areas of diverse inclusion and funding streams, it's very difficult to get money to do this work. And in terms of Proud to Play perspective, there's 4 of us, we work part-time. We are rushed off our feet. Literally, we could do so much more, but we need this work to be funded, and we need governments, organisations to understand that there's serious problems with this at the minute, especially around trans inclusion. We need targeted action and work to do that. So I'm hopeful that funding will start to trickle through for this work because there's a clear community need. And I'm hopeful that some of the sports that have led the way, so for example, tennis, I do a lot of work with, they're doing a lot of great work. And other sports who have done stuff in the past, like cricket, have done some kind of good stuff in the space, that other sports will now see what can be done and the business benefits for it. Because even like just thinking back to a couple of months ago, I was at the SCG for Mardi Gras. The whole stadium was full. And there's these people who say, oh, we can't fill stadiums. No, the gays don't want to come, etc. Like, it's just lies. So there's a market there who are ready, and a lot of my research shows they want to be included. Young people, they want to play sport, they want to be part of clubs. But I think at the minute, sport is doing a very good job at switching people off. So I think if they can really turn a corner and engage and share the positive stories, because I do wonder why I do this work, to be honest. Like sport has been my life. I work in it. I've been to the Olympics. I've volunteered at the Olympics. I've travelled. I've had a very good life, courtesy of sport. But at the moment, it's challenging me. I'm not going to lie.
So, Ryan, I'll just give you the answer that my wife gives me when I go, why do I do this? She said, or why did I choose to do this? She said, you didn't choose it. It chose you. And I'm glad that it chose you because you're, well, as you've said in your own words, you're, the leader of Proud to Play. You're a pracademic. You're focusing in on how to create more inclusion in sport for this fabulous rainbow community that we're both members of. But you've given some great advice for our listeners around, business management skills are empathy and understanding your customers, which statistically, we're out there. The rainbow community are your customers, your members, your sponsors, and to failing to address or take care of and look at that the rainbow community in terms of sport is bad business management. You've given some great resources which are going to be in the show notes around what to watch, what to read, where to go, what resources, and also a bit of some checklists. How do I get started? And finally, what I absolutely appreciate and love is the fact that you've said we've got to call it out. So when you hear and when you see transphobia, misogyny, sexism, whether it be little or big, please educate yourself on how you can be an upstander and call it out and be a great ally to the rainbow community. And in the context of what I'm doing, specifically gay women and trans women in sport, because we're there and we want to belong. So Dr. Ryan Storr, thank you for your time and your wisdom. And please keep choosing sport because we need you.
Thank you. It was great to chat with you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. I hope that you can gain a lot of insights and, importantly, take action wherever you may work in sport. Please, if you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating. It really helps to spread the word. And of course, please do share this episode with your friends, with your colleagues, and with your network of people in sport, because together we can close the leadership gender gap.